Hi, my name's Michael and I'm the brother of Alice, and I'm here to talk to you about how to be an inventor. I had hoped that I would deliver this talk to you in person over link, and then we could have interacted a bit and you could have asked questions and I could have not known the answers and it would have been a lot more interesting. But unfortunately the technology let us down, so maybe after you finish listening to this talk you'll be able to invent a better technology so that we can talk to each other about inventing better technologies. Anyway, so I'm going to talk to you about how to be an inventor, but I think it's actually really about how to have fun, because inventing things is just good fun, I reckon. So how do we go about actually inventing something? Well, I think there are a whole lot of different ways to invent things, and I'm going to talk about some of them and then give you some examples of some of them, including maybe even a thing that I've sort of invented myself. And so what we usually start off with is a problem. So something that's annoying us, something that's causing us stress or making life hard for us that we want to solve. And rather than just accepting it, and look, here's an example of a problem now that we could either accept or make go away. Hopefully it'll now stay away. So we start off with a problem, and rather than just accepting it, we decide we want to do something about it. And we think about it for a while, and then we get an idea and we go, well, what about if I did this? Maybe then I wouldn't have to face that problem anymore. And if you have success, maybe you can actually turn your idea into an invention and it works and it solves the problem. So that's probably, the way most people think of inventions, solving a problem. But it doesn't have to start like that. For example, you might start with an idea. Just have an idea and think, that's a really cool idea. I wonder whether I could use that idea for anything. And then you think of a use, and then you get to an invention. Or maybe you're just doing something and you have a little accident. Things go wrong. Something turns out not the way you'd expected. And then rather than getting upset about it or thinking, well, this is bad, you could think, well, wow, that's actually pretty cool. That's not what I expected, but maybe I can actually use this for something useful. And then once again, you can come up with an invention. Or maybe you can just be out there looking at the world around you and noticing things and thinking, wow, that's pretty cool. Maybe something that nature does is pretty cool. Birds can fly. Maybe I could actually invent a machine that could fly, and then I could fly too. And so that's another way to eventually come up with an invention. So there's lots of different ways to coming up with inventions, and I want to talk about a few of those today and give you some examples. But just to make sure you've been listening, I'm actually going to give you an exam as well. In fact, I'm going to give you lots of little exams throughout this whole talk, and so that you can make sure you're listening and then answer the questions. So let's start here. We've got a picture of a tube of superglue. And so some smart guys from 3M, the company 3M, invented this superglue stuff. And while they were working on it, apparently one of the engineers made a bit of a messed things up a little bit and didn't get it quite right. And the glue that he created actually wouldn't stick very well at all. Superglue is supposed to be really strong, right? One drop holds a ton. But this stuff that he made would hardly hold anything. In fact, it would hardly even hold two bits of paper together. You'd sort of push them together and then they'd kind of come apart again as soon as you pulled them. And rather than being discouraged by this, he thought about it and he thought, well, hang on a minute, maybe we could use this for something. Maybe we could use these little bits of paper with this sticky stuff on them as bookmarks. And so that's how Post-it notes were invented. And the key to them was actually having a glue that wasn't very strong, that was easy to get off when you wanted to get it off. And so you can see that rather than this being a failure, it actually turned into a really good success story, and it made the company lots of money. And then lots of other companies copied that idea. And so the moral of this little story is, just because you might have a bit of a failure, stick with it, and maybe you can make something good out of it. So now I'm going to ask you a question. Which of these ways of inventing things do you think this particular example falls into? Now I'll give you, let's say, 20 seconds to have a think about it and discuss it amongst yourselves. Is 20 seconds long enough? That's about 20 seconds coming up now. Maybe I'll give you another 10. Okay, so that's 30 seconds. Well, I think it's this one here. Now, did I get it right? Is this the right answer? I think this is an example of an accident, something that went wrong, and then rather than seeing it as a failure, you made the best of it, and you ended up with something really cool as a result. So let's have a look at another example. There was this guy called George de Mesterel, and he lived in Switzerland, and he was an engineer, and he had a dog. And he used to love to take his dogs for a walk in the grass like this. And everything's looking pretty good at this stage, isn't it? And this is what the grass looked like. So it looks pretty nice, right? Or does it? Can you see something in that grass there that maybe is not so good? Can you see these things here? Burrs. So what do you think is going to happen when this dog goes for a walk in this grass? It's not going to be pretty, is it? Well, this is kind of the sort of thing that happened. The dog ended up getting all of the burrs stuck to itself. The poor thing, it probably couldn't even open its eyes by the look of it. And it's got so stressed that its nose has changed colour as well. Poor thing. Anyway, so rather than being discouraged by this George de Mestrel thought, wow, why do these burrs stick to the dog so terribly? You know, they're really hard to get off, and he just brushes past them and bang, they're on. And he had a look at the things, and he realised that the reason that they stick is they've got a whole lot of little hooks on them that really sort of get all tangled up in the dog's fur. And so he thought, maybe we could use this for something. And what do you think he invented out of this as a result? Can you think of an invention that uses hooks, little tiny little hooks, and fluffy stuff, a bit like fur? I'll give you a little while to have a think about that one. Maybe another 20 seconds. I think that's probably about 20 seconds there. Well, what he actually invented was Velcro. So Velcro consists of a whole lot of little hooks on the, what do we call it, maybe the male half, and on the other half it consists of furry stuff, a bit like a dog's fur. And Velcro, as you probably know, is a super useful thing nowadays. It's replaced zippers and buttons and all sorts of things. You use it maybe to keep your bag closed or your runners on or your phone cover closed or all sorts of things. And so there's an example of another invention that happened in maybe a way that you wouldn't quite expect. And so out of all these different ways to invent, how do you think which one do you think this fits into? And what I'm going to do is I'm actually not going to wait for 20 seconds this time, because I've just realised you can probably just pause the video and take as long as you want. And so I'm going to give you the answer now. So the answer that I think it is this one here. Somebody went out and observed what was happening in nature and saw something that was interesting and then said, well, what if I did this? And actually came up with a useful invention out of it. So there's another example. Let's move on to the next one. Now, back in my day when we were kids, we used to watch different TV shows. And one of the TV shows that we liked was, or some of us liked at least, was Star Trek. And one of the gadgets that they had in Star Trek was this thing called a communicator. And they used to be able to talk to each other using this communicator, even though they were physically too far away from each other to hear. And so that was the idea, and it was science fiction at the time. You couldn't actually really do this at all. But back in those days, this guy called Martin Cooper, who was an engineer who worked for Motorola, saw this Star Trek idea and thought, you know, I reckon we can actually do that. I reckon we can make one of those communicator things, and so people can talk to each other, just like they talk to each other now on the telephone, except without wires. So they don't have to actually drag these copper wires around with them when they're going for a bike ride or whatever. And so, of course, what that led to was the invention of the mobile phone. So here you can see on the left, the great big bricky looking thing was one of the first mobile phones, and then as time went on, they got more and more clever, and more people got involved, and they had better and better ideas, and they made the phones smaller and smaller and made them smarter and smarter. And now the mobile phone is about possibly one of man's greatest inventions. I think you'd all agree that what we can do now with mobile phones is just fantastic. We don't just talk on them anymore, we use them for all sorts of things. So what category do you think this invention fits into? Now I'll let you pause the video now and have a talk about it, and now I'm going to tell you the answer, or what I think the answer is anyway, which is this one here. So in this case, it started with an idea that was really science fiction at the time, and then somebody thought, that's a cool idea, that's really cool, maybe we can actually do that, actually build something that implements that idea. And they did, and they made an invention. Now to our final example. Who knows what this is? I bet you haven't seen many of these around the streets of Marlo. It's a Volkswagen Beetle, and it was one of the most successful mass production cars ever built. I remember when I was a kid driving with my sisters on the way to school, and I remember counting the cars on the road. And back then, in those days, I remember on that particular trip, it was about a 10-minute trip, 1 in every 3 cars was a Volkswagen Beetle. So they used to be really, really super popular back then. So I think you'll agree that car is an amazing invention. It is absolutely fantastic what we can do with our cars. Get from A to B at really high speed in great comfort with air conditioning and looking out the window and everything. But sometimes with cars, things go wrong. We don't drive them very well, or we're not paying attention, and bad things happen like this. Well, there was an engineer in Sweden who thought, that's bad. People get hurt when cars crash, and sometimes they even get killed, and I don't want that to happen. I want to do something about that and make cars safer. And so he had the idea, well, why not put all of these pillows around the place, and so that when people crash, they crash into something nice and soft, like a pillow, an airbag. And so he had the idea of inventing airbags. But actually, it took a very, very long time and a lot of work before airbags actually became a proper, useful working thing. Because the problem was, you can't just have the airbags there all the time, because then you can't see out the front of the car, and then you crash even more often. And so what they had to do was they had to invent some way of making these airbags only come out when they were needed, only when you had a crash. And so they spent a lot of time trying to work out, how can we do this? And eventually, of course, they built a fancy little sensor that sits inside the car and that actually understands when a crash has just happened, and then quicker than you can even think, manages to set off an explosive which blows up the airbags and puts them in the way so that you don't hit the windshield or the steering wheel or whatever, and helps you to be safe. So this is another example of a fantastic invention that somebody's come up with. And what category do you think this falls into? There's only one left, so you should be able to get this one right. Have a think about it. Okay, well, I think it's this one here. Somebody faced a problem, were annoyed by it, didn't accept it, wanted to do something about it, wanted to change it. And so they had an idea, and they persisted with it, and finally they got something working, and now it's pretty much in all the cars you can buy. If the car hasn't got airbags in it, well then, yeah, you really should be not buying it. So there's some examples of some inventions from some really great inventors. It's always good to look at people who invented great things for inspiration. Not only for the things they've invented, but just their philosophy on life and their ideas about what's important and what you should be thinking about. And so here's some quotes from some great inventors. Albert Einstein, one of the most creative and inventive people ever. One of his great quotes was, "Imagination is more important than intelligence." And so what he saw was that it's not about being smart, being an inventor or coming up with new stuff. It's about having an imagination. It's about being able to think about things that aren't there right now and visualize things that could be rather than that are. Here's another quote from Thomas Edison, who was also a great inventor and a great businessman, maybe even more so. And he said to invent, you need a good imagination and a pile of junk. And so that was really something that I used to love doing when I was a kid. I used to love going out on dump day and collecting all, bits and pieces of vacuum cleaners or washing machines or televisions or whatever, and carting them all home and sticking them in the garage, and then getting a screwdriver and a pair of pliers and maybe a hammer if things were a bit hard, and taking them all apart. And then I used to get all the interesting looking bits out of them, all the nuts and bolts and springs and wires and globes and motors and whatever else. And then I'd collect them all and I'd put them in boxes, and then I'd put them in my bookshelf in the bungalow where I lived. And then whenever I wanted to make something, I'd always have a good pile of bits and pieces that I could go and get things from to help me with making. And then the final quote from Albert, I don't even know how to pronounce his surname, I won't even try. But this guy was the one who invented vitamin C. And he said, discovery consists of seeing what everybody else has seen and thinking what nobody has thought. And so I think that's a great quote, because inventing is all about not just accepting what you see and sort of thinking what everybody else thinks. It's about trying to see it differently and trying to see things that aren't there yet, think about things that haven't been thought about yet, and then making them into something useful. So there's some quotes, and maybe now you can have a bit of a think about what might be important qualities for inventors to have. So of all those examples that I've given you, and from the quotes on this page, maybe you can have a bit of a think about what sort of qualities would be useful to have as an inventor. What would be useful to help you invent stuff? So maybe what you can do now is pause the video again and have a little think about that. And then when you're ready, you can hit go again, and I'll tell you what I think useful qualities are. So here are some of the things that I think are useful qualities for an inventor. Firstly, I think maybe the most important is you have to be curious and inquisitive and questioning. You want to look at things and really want to understand them. How do things work? What's behind it? What would happen if I did this? What would happen if I did that? Because that's how you really learn about stuff. The second thing I think you have to be, as I've said a few times already, is to be imaginative. You have to be able to see things that are not there yet and be able to imagine what might be. Then you have to be able to be creative. And so you need to be able to make things from your ideas and turn your ideas into something that's actually real. It might not be something you can touch. It might be like a piece of software that's very clever, that does something like understand speech when you speak to it, or something like that. But you need to be able to take your idea out of your head and make it into something real. And that's kind of being creative. You need to be open-minded too. And I think this one's really important, because you need to be able to try things that are not necessarily going to work and not necessarily going to be useful. But that doesn't matter at all. It's all about having fun. It's all about trying to do things that you think will be really cool. And maybe they don't work, and maybe they do, and maybe they're useful, maybe they're not. But that's not the important thing. The important thing is actually just to have fun trying to do it, and not to be worried if people say, oh, that'll never work, or what would you want to do that for? We've already got one that works. Why would you want a better mousetrap? Don't listen to those people. Listen to the people that get excited. That's the people that you want to share your ideas with. You have to be passionate, I reckon, to be a good inventor. You have to get really excited about your ideas and fall in love with them, and so that you're prepared to really go for it and really work hard to get your idea working. And finally, you have to be a little bit knowledgeable as well. So you have to know stuff that'll help you. Now, as you know, humans have been around for, quite a while now, more than a few years. And the other humans that lived before us have come up with lots of really cool stuff, and they've invented stuff, and they've learned things. And so rather than starting from scratch, rather than trying to do everything yourself, if you build on what everybody else has already done, then you can make even bigger and greater inventions than you could if you were just starting by yourself. And so knowledge, trying to get into yourself what all the other people have learned and experienced before you will help you make even greater inventions than before. And you never stop with that process of learning. So all the stuff you learn now at school is really important. And I think the stuff that's the most important, there's 3 things that I think are really important to learn at school. One of them is English. Obviously, you need to be able to read and write and converse with people and understand what they're saying if you want to be able to work together with people and share ideas. And English is pretty easy, right? We all know how to talk and communicate. It's not very hard when you live in Australia learning English. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think that you need to do is to be good at maths, because maths is really important. It's like the language of numbers, and so it's understanding how you can represent things in numbers, how you can count them, how you can work out what might happen in future, how you can work out the probability that if you roll a dice, a 6 will come up, or how big something will be, or how many grains of seed you need to sow in a paddock, or something like that, or how strong you have to make a bridge so that it won't fall down when you drive a truck over it. All of that sort of stuff involves maths. And the third thing that I think you really need to know about is computers, because increasingly computers are something that it's one of our most valuable tools. So back in the old days, we used to use things like maybe a stone axe or a spear to help us with our lives. And then we got a bit more sophisticated and we started using things like wheels to make wagons. And then we got even more sophisticated and we started putting engines in them to turn them into cars. And nowadays, our most valuable and important tool is the computer. And it helps us with so many things. And computers are getting smarter and smarter and smarter every day. And I actually think that one day computers will be so smart that they'll begin to be as smart as us, if not smarter. And I hope good things will happen when that occurs. But who knows? But anyway, we never stop learning. And so even now, when I'm sort of well into my career and I've got a job and I've been in the job for quite a few years now, I'm still learning. And in fact, I'm doing a course right now at university to help me learn about how machines learn. And so the course is called Machine Learning. And it's all about how we can get computers to be smarter and so that they can help us to do the things that we want to do. Now, there's maybe some things that I haven't actually got on this page. You might be thinking about, well, what about things like being resilient and not giving up and all that sort of stuff? Being tenacious and being, what's the word that I'm looking for? I can't think of it. It starts with I think. Maybe you can think of the word. It's just escaped me for the moment. I don't know what it is. But anyway, I think you know what I mean. So why haven't I put that one up there? Well, to me, persistent, that's what it was. It doesn't start with I, does it? It starts with P, being persistent. So why haven't I got that up there? Because that's pretty important. Well, the reason that I haven't got it up there is because if you're passionate, if you're excited about things, then persistence just comes automatically. You don't even need to try to be persistent. You want to be. So I'll give you an example. If you're playing a computer game, right, when you first start, the aliens beat you all the time, don't they? They just slaughter you and you haven't got a chance, and you get maybe half a level into the game and then you get killed and you have to start again. And yet you do, don't you? You keep trying and trying and trying, and those aliens keep beating you, but you keep trying, and eventually you get to level 2 and then level 3 and level 4. You're being persistent, aren't you? But you don't even think about it. It's not hard to be persistent at a computer game because it's fun. You're enjoying what you do. Well, I think inventing's the same. When you invent things, if they don't work and they fail, you don't even think about it. You just go, oh, that didn't work as I expected. Well, okay, maybe if I try this. And you just go on. So there's some qualities that I think would be useful for an inventor. So now what I want to do finally is tell you something about an invention of mine. Now, when I say it's an invention of mine, it's not really an invention of mine. Somebody thought about this before I did. But I kind of reinvented it and gave it my own flavour. And so I can sort of maybe think of some of these things as a bit my inventions as well. So this starts off with a problem, this particular type of invention. So my problem was that I did not have a good sense of direction. And in fact, I still don't. I've got a lousy sense of direction. And I get lost all the time. I'm one of those people that can walk into a shop and have a look at something and then walk out of the shop and then go back the wrong way down the street that I just walked out of about 2 minutes ago. And when we were going around Australia, when I was going around with my family, I used to get lost all the time in the campground, and I'd head off to the shower block with let's say my youngest son, who was 4 years old at the time, and then I'd get to the shower and I'd have him a shower and he'd have his shower and we'd all be ready to go, and then I'd think, oh no, I forgot to look which way the tent was. Oh damn, now I've got no idea how to get back to the tent. Oh, what am I going to do now? I don't want to be blundering around in the dark all night. So then what I'd say to my son is, hey, do you want to have a race back to the tent? And he'd go, yeah, sure, Dad. And he'd run off towards the tent because he always seemed to know where it was. And then I'd chase after him, and then he'd win, and then everybody would be happy. Except for me, because I wasn't really happy that I had to, keep asking to have a race and I didn't have a good sense of direction. So I thought, this is not right, When you're born and you first look down and you realise that you're a boy, then you have certain expectations about how things are going to turn out. You sort of expect, well, when I grow up, I'm going to be a big, strong man. And when I'm a big, strong man, I'm never going to have to ask for directions. Well, I always have to ask for directions, and it really annoys me. It's just wrong. So I thought, well, what I need is a sense of direction. And so you probably know you have some senses already, right? You have 5 senses. Do you know what they are? Can you name them? I'll let you just have a think about it. You can pause the video for a minute, have a think about the 5 senses, and then tell me what they are. All right, so you've thought about your 5 senses. Now, do they include a sense of direction? They don't really, do they? So this is a bit of a shortcoming of humans, is they don't really have a sense of direction. And so I didn't like this, and I decided what I'm going to do is I'm going to build myself a sense of direction. It can't be that hard. I mean, our brain, our human brain, these days people have learned that it's plastic. It's what they call plastic, and that means that it can accept new inputs. So even though right now we only have 5 senses, it's quite possible for the brain to learn about a new sense. As long as you can give it the input, as long as you can give it direction as an input, then your brain will learn what to do with it all by itself. It's really cool. It's very, very cool brain plasticity. Anyway, so what I thought is all I have to do is build something, some little gadget that can work out where north is, and then somehow just feed that signal into my brain, and then I'll have a 6th sense. It can't be that hard, right? So that's the idea. And then I remembered this thing here. You probably all know what this is, right? Yeah, it's a compass. It points north. And I remembered reading about a guy who used the Earth's magnetic field, which is what a compass uses to point north, to actually make a gadget for himself. And so, does anybody know what this picture is? It's actually my picture of a person. So if you can imagine this is actually a person being looked at from the top. So you're looking down on the top of the head. I'm not a very good drawer, am I? But anyway, you get the idea. His head's there and his feet are pointing forward. And those little stars around his body are actually little vibrating motors. So what a guy did a long time ago now is he made a belt that he used to wear. And on that belt he had a series of vibrating motors that were positioned all the way around the belt. And he had this very clever controller. And what the controller did is it measured where north was, and then it made the vibrator that was in the direction of north vibrate. And so he could always feel where north was. And the idea was that then his brain would start to feel this vibration, and then it would eventually learn that the vibration is where north is. And then he would have a sense of direction. And he actually wore this belt I think he wore it for like 10 weeks or something. And he found that he got a really good sense of direction. So his brain stopped feeling the vibrations as a sense of vibration and started sort of taking it as a sense of direction instead. And so what it did is it remapped all the nerves around his tummy into a sense of direction, so he could tell which way north was, which is pretty cool, isn't it? So I thought, maybe I can build one of these belts too. I thought that would be really cool. So what we'll do is we'll turn the motor on which faces north. And so, for example, if north is over in this direction here, we make this motor vibrate. And if north is down here, we make that motor vibrate. That's pretty cool, isn't it? I thought, ooh, but what about if north is down there? Which motor do we make vibrate now? Can you ever think about that? What might you do in this case? Well, my solution was to make both of those motors vibrate, and that would then show you that north was down here. So I decided that I was going to make one of these belts that this guy made. And I was in Germany at the time, and then I got onto Google, our great friend Google, and I looked around for something that could measure the Earth's magnetic field, because that's the start, right? You need to know which way the Earth's magnetic field is pointing, and so you know which way north is. And there was this special little silicon chip that you could buy that actually measured where north was. And then I thought, well, to get the chip to actually do something, you need something to control your motors. And what I found was there was this little computer, a tiny little computer that was about as big as a couple of matchboxes together, called an Arduino. And it was very flexible, and what you could do is you could make the computer do all sorts of stuff. And so you could connect up this magnetic field sensor, which is actually called a magnetometer, to the computer, and then the computer would know where north is. And then, oh yeah, and to make the computer work, you need to power it with a battery. So I'd need a battery as well. And then what you get the computer to do is turn on some vibrating motors. And these little round things here, each one of those is a vibrating motor. And they're exactly the same as the little vibrating motors that are in your mobile phone. So when you feel your mobile phone vibrating, it's because it has one of these little motors inside it. They're very tiny, they're about the size, even smaller than a 1-cent coin. And anyway, in order to get these motors to vibrate, I'd need some sort of special electronic circuitry to go in between to make them, to turn them on and off. And then I'd need to sort of put them on some kind of belt or something. So that was a plan. That was a plan. And I thought, well, I'm going to be wearing these motors, and they're going to be next to my skin so that I can feel them. But the trouble is, if I wear them all the time, if I wear them when I'm exercising and when I'm sweating, then they're going to get all wet. And one thing I know about electricity is that electricity and water don't really go that well together. Sometimes it'd be quite dangerous. And so I thought, I've got to keep the water away from these motors. How do I do that if they're right next to my skin? And what about if it rains, they'll get all wet? What can I do? And so I thought, I've got to waterproof them somehow. And so I went online and searched out whether anybody had made these motors waterproof, or whether you could buy some waterproof ones. And I found that you couldn't buy any waterproof ones, but what you could do is you could actually waterproof them by dipping them in some plastic compound, a bit like paint, and the paint would stick to the outside of them and make them waterproof. But what they said on the website was that when you do this, sometimes some of this plastic stuff gets inside the motor and wrecks it, so they don't work anymore because it glues up the inside of the motor. And that wasn't any good, because I only had a fixed number of motors, and I didn't have enough to waste some breaking them trying to waterproof them. And so what I decided to do was to cover the motors in something first. And I used this copper tape here to wind around the motors to cover them all up. And then I put them into this rubber solution, which coated them like this until they turned white. I did that 6 times on each motor. And now they had a nice rubber coating on them that couldn't get inside the motor. And now they were nice and waterproof. So I could even use them underwater if I wanted to, and they wouldn't let any water in. So that was one of the problems that I faced that I had to solve. And they're all hanging up drying here. That's why they're on my little helper, my little magnifying helper. And after I'd done this, I actually wrote to the company about how I'd waterproof my motors and told them all about it. And this is really important, I think, these days. So much of what we do depends on the work of others. And when I want to build something or invent something, I don't start from scratch myself. I have a look around and see what other people have done, and their work helps me. And it goes two ways, right? When you use other people's work, it's good to share your work as well so that they can benefit, and then they can use what you did without having to reinvent it themselves. And so I wrote to this company and shared some advice for them on how we could waterproof their motors without damaging them. That's really important, collaboration when you're inventing stuff. And so I started to make my belt, and I didn't use a big heavy leather belt like I showed in that picture before. I decided that I wanted something very light that I could wear next to my skin. So I went to the shops and bought a big long piece of underpants elastic. And there it is there, the underpants elastic, and you can see it's got lots of wires coming to it, and I'm just starting to put it together here, and it looks really, really messy and confusing because there's wires going everywhere. And it took a long time to work out how to do it all. And you can see these little crosses on the side. That's where I'm going to put the motors. And then I started soldering things and wiring things up and putting bits of electronics together, and it was all looking really messy on my dining room table. But eventually, after I got all my plans sorted out and worked out, I managed to produce this thing here. And here's the belt. So this is the thing that goes around my waist, the piece of underpants elastic. And at each one of these little crosses, there's 8 of them. There's a motor, which can be turned on and off by this little computer here. And on the side, just this tiny little white square here, you can see, that's the magnetometer that measures where north is, and it talks to the computer over these wires. And it's all powered by this battery here. So there it was, the belt. I finally made it. And there I am wearing it. You can see the belt there. And the electronics, the little computer and the battery are sitting inside this highly fashionable accessories pouch here. And that's what I used to wear around the streets of Germany when I first made it. So when I finished it, I was so happy that it was finished. And it was finally working after all the dead ends and failures. And I finally got it working. And I went out, and the thing you do in Germany when you're happy is you go out and you have a glass of beer and a sausage. That's what we do in Germany. So I had a glass of beer and a sausage, and there you can see the little computer inside the black box there, and the battery connected up to the belt via this ribbon cable here. And so I took my belt out into the streets of Germany. And here's one of the buildings that I walked past. It's pretty cool, isn't it? What an awesome inventor who invented this building here. It's fantastic. And I found some really interesting thing happened when I wore my belt. I found I could not only tell where north was, but it was like I could feel the Earth's magnetic field. And so as I walked around, I could feel which way north was. And not only that, but what we do when we make things, particularly when we make things out of metal, is that we have an impact on the Earth's magnetic field. We change the Earth's magnetic field. And so whenever we put a big lump of iron or steel somewhere, it actually changes the Earth's magnetic field. It makes it point in a slightly different direction. And so that's why sometimes if you have a compass and you bring it up against something metal, it'll point in a different direction. It'll maybe point towards the metal thing. And so I found that as I was walking along the streets with my belt, I could feel metal things around me. I could feel, yes, north's up in front of me. And then as I walked past a steel lamppost, I could feel it pulling on the magnetic field, and I could feel the magnetic field swinging around and pointing in a different direction. And that was so cool to be able to feel the impact that man was having on the Earth's magnetic field. I thought that was so cool. And then I'd go to the train station and get on the train to work, and I'd close my eyes, and as the train pulled up, and they're very quiet trains in Germany, you can hardly hear them, I could feel the train arriving because I could feel the magnetic fields inside the motors in the train. I could feel them doing crazy things with my belt, making it spin around. The vibrations were just going round and round my stomach and doing all sorts of weird stuff like that. And so it was pretty cool. And I wore my belt for 10 days. Every day I woke up in the morning and I wore my belt. And then a really interesting thing happened. I woke up in the morning on the 10th morning, and I could feel the belt vibrating on my back. But the really, really freaky thing was that I wasn't actually wearing the belt. At night time, I took the belt off because it was too uncomfortable to wear in bed. And yet when I woke up in the morning, I thought, I can feel it vibrating. And then I rolled over in bed, and as I rolled over in bed, what happened was the point that the sheet was touching my waist felt like it was vibrating. And as I rolled over in bed, that point of contact between me and the sheet moved around my stomach, and the vibration followed it. And so the really interesting thing about that was that my brain, after 10 days, had rewired itself, and it was now expecting a vibration from my waist. And when the vibration wasn't there anymore, it was kind of getting confused, and it was saying, hey, there should be some vibration down there. Maybe it's over there. And it kind of created a phantom vibration all by itself. Or at least that's the way I thought about it. And so I thought, that is so cool. After only 10 days, my brain is learning to recognize this new input, this new sixth sense. Even when it's not there, I'm starting to feel vibrations. So I put the belt back on again, and I wore it all day. And then at night, I took it off and went to bed. But that night, those phantom vibrations had got so strong that I couldn't sleep. It felt like my whole waist was vibrating. It was all buzzing, and it was really, really annoying. And I couldn't get to sleep. And it was getting later and later, and it was 12 o'clock midnight, and then it was 1 o'clock, and then it was 2 o'clock, and then it was 3 o'clock, and I could not sleep. I was rolling around going crazy with these vibrations. This is a true story, by the way. And then at 4 o'clock in the morning, I couldn't stand it anymore. I was feeling sick. I felt like I wanted to vomit. And then I stood up and thought, I can't stand this anymore. What am I going to do? It's driving me nuts. And so I got up and I put the belt back on again. And as soon as I put the belt back on and it started vibrating, the phantom vibrations went away, because now there was a real vibration there. And my brain was saying, okay, there's the vibration. I don't have to make one anymore. That's all good now. And so then I thought, wow, that is so cool. My brain is really starting to rewire itself now. And then I got a bit scared, because I thought, oh no, this is terrible, because now I've actually made myself dependent on the belt. I need to wear it, otherwise I'm uncomfortable, I'm unhappy. Otherwise I get symptoms of withdrawal, like when you're taking a drug and you stop taking it, then you want it again. So I was actually quite scared about that. But anyway, after a while, the phantom vibrations my brain learned that when I take the belt off, it doesn't vibrate anymore, and they kind of went away. And unfortunately, because I was traveling around at the time for work, I didn't get to wear the belt long enough to actually develop a sixth sense. But I do hope that one day I'm going to put it on again, and I'm going to wear it for long enough to really develop a sixth sense. And I'm really looking forward to the day when I have some time to do that, several weeks in a row, where I can wear it and really develop a sixth sense. So anyway, there's the story of my sixth sense and the huge amount of fun that I had creating a belt. And you might be asking, well, what use is it? Well, I don't know. But I don't really care, because it was just good fun to make something. And maybe someday somebody will think of some great use for it, and everybody will be wearing one, and maybe nobody will. But that doesn't matter, because it was just good fun. And so the final thing that I want to share with you today is I told you some good, I gave you my advice on what I think are good qualities that would help you as an engineer. But I had like a special secret to becoming an engineer, or an inventor, I should say. And my special secret was, let's see whether you can think what it was. Let's see whether Alice knows what it is. She's my sister, so maybe she can guess. I'll give you a while to think about it, whether you can think about my special secret for being an inventor. Well, here's my special secret. It's something that you won't expect at all, I think. It's actually a poem. It's this poem here. And this was written by my godmother. And she was called Auntie Daphne. And this is her poem. She said, "To Michael on his first birthday, it's wonderful when one is one, and boring babyhood is done, with all life's marvels to unwrap, just like the presents in your lap. A million things to see and feel, and smell and chew and poke and peel, things to pull apart and pick, to try and see what makes them tick. For life is a great big box of toys, just made for nosy little boys. And so here's my birthday wish for you, that whatsoever you may do, in years to come when things look bad, and life seems dreary, dull and sad, you'll never lose the sense of fun you had when you were only one." And so this poem used to sit by my bedside, and I'd read it every night before I went to bed. And I think those words of this poem kind of got inside me, and it made me enjoy life and thinking about things and fiddling with things and pulling things apart and trying to see how they work and trying to make things. And so I'm very grateful to my Auntie Daphne for giving me this incredible gift that helped me to enjoy my life more and be a bit of an inventor. And now I'm an engineer. I work for a company called Ericsson, and we make mobile phone networks. And my job is kind of, you could say it was really inventing stuff. And the stuff that I invent is not gadget with springs and levers and bolts and things. It's often software, or it's techniques for doing things or understanding things. And so I'm still inventing, but they're not things that you can touch and feel. Maybe they're more abstract things. But it's heaps of fun. So anyway, thank you for listening to me today. I hope you've got a bit of an idea about, well, my idea about what I think inventing is all about. And I hope that you're inspired and that you can go out and maybe invent some things of your own and have lots of fun doing it. Okay, bye-bye.